So over the past several months, I have been playing a lot of Dungeons & Dragons. I just finished DMing for one campaign, now I currently DM for 2 campaigns, and I get to actually play in a campaign as a player. It's a lot of D&D, it's a pretty massive time commitment, but it's a super fun hobby that I have grown to really love. I honestly play way more D&D than I play video games anymore. And for me, it's because my style of video game are always going to be those RPGs with big choices and visceral combat. And in some ways, D&D just scratches that itch just a little bit more because you can be so much more creative and do things that are not as hard-coded as are in a video game. And as I have started and progressed through my D&D journey, I have enjoyed getting some of my friends and colleagues to pick up the hobby as well. And so if you've ever watched an episode of Critical Role, Dimension 20, or you watch Stranger Things and you thought for a second, is D&D something I might enjoy? That's what we're here to talk about today. If you have ever thought about playing D&D, we're gonna talk about today. Is it maybe a right fit for you? Is it something you should try? What are the things that you need to play D&D? And then how do you get started if you really want to play? Now, D&D was not the initial focus of this YouTube channel. Granted, at this point, the focus of the YouTube channel is whichever niche thing I've kind of latched onto, which right now is D&D. So if you enjoy this video and you enjoy D&D, make sure to comment down below to let me know that you enjoy the content I'm putting out. Additionally, if this video inspires you to play D&D, or if you've just recently started on it, that would be awesome if you would let me know down in the comments. It makes me feel great to know that I have inspired someone to pick up this awesome hobby. And if you enjoy my content, but you don't really have anything to say, just comment your favorite emoji down below. Those comments go towards engagement, it helps other people find the video, and it is a massive help to the channel. It is easily the best way you can support the channel, and it is completely free. While you're at it, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell so you get notifications of videos like this. And let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Now, first up, let's talk about, is D&D a good fit for me as a player of games? Now, when I've tried to pitch D&D to some of my friends, a common answer I get is, I don't know if I'm creative enough to play Dungeons & Dragons. Now, for people who think this, I don't know what level of creativity you think is needed to play Dungeons & Dragons, but I would say you are overestimating the amount of creativity you need. If you have literally no creativity, your dungeon master is still going to guide you through the quests in your adventure. You are going to meet NPCs that give you tips to go along and complete your adventure, and you are still going to be able to have a successful campaign. You may fall for some of the DM's traps. You may trust an untrustworthy NPC. You may murder an innocent person because you didn't trust them. But honestly, some of those things make for the best stories when you're thinking about your adventures you've gone on with your friends. And creativity doesn't necessarily mean you are going to be more successful in your game. Some of the biggest blunders that I've seen in Dungeons & Dragons happen from an extremely creative moment. Now, don't get me wrong though, those creative blunders are, again, some really awesome moments that you are gonna talk about with your friends for days after the session. But those really cool creative moments where something you've thought about for like an hour just comes to fruition and works really, really well, those moments are also super cool. So I would say this, if you feel like you have no creativity at all, you're still going to be fine. And if you have ever played a video game like Fallout 4 or Skyrim, and you've been in a dialogue with an NPC and you said, man, I really wish that this was a conversation option. Or man, wouldn't it be really cool if they had this plot twist in the quest? Or man, I wish I could accomplish the quest in this specific way. Then you are absolutely creative enough to do some really cool things inside of Dungeons & Dragons. So don't let that keep you back from trying out a new hobby. Now, if you have no interest in creativity at all, if you don't have any interest in political intrigue, conversations with NPCs, learning about lore, or learning about the traditions of a town or a people, dungeon crawlers are still a thing in Dungeons & Dragons. In those, you just go through a dungeon, you solve puzzles, you kill monsters, and you fight a boss. You get some cool loot and treasure along the way, and it's still really fun. Those are just about rolling dice and killing things, and they have their place too, and they're really fun. So if that seems more your style, there are plenty of groups out there doing dungeon crawlers that you can do as well. Another big thing you need to consider when you're thinking about getting into Dungeons & Dragons is the amount of time you're willing to commit to the hobby. The average session for D&D is probably going to last somewhere between 3 to 5 hours. Now, of course, that 3 to 5 hours is going to include snack breaks, probably some time where you're just joking around with your friends, bathroom breaks, all of those fun things. But regardless, that is still a pretty big chunk of time that either bi-weekly or weekly you are committing, you are blocking out of your calendar to play a game with your friends. I know that sounds like a lot of time, but believe me when I tell you, if you enjoy D&D and you find it's a good fit for you, those hours are going to fly by. Sessions can definitely go longer, but it's kind of hard to get what you want out of a session if you're only going to play for an hour or two. In fact, personally, I would find it a red flag if I were joining a campaign group and the group was saying, yeah, we play for 1 to 2 hours every week. It just, that campaign might go on for a very long time because you're not going to get a whole lot done in each session. But let me tell you, the time commitment may sound really overwhelming at first, but I think if you play and you end up enjoying it, you may really like it. And it won't seem like nearly the scary time commitment as I'm making it sound right now. And additionally, go play a game, go play a session. And if you realize this was way too much time, I can't commit this every week, just tell your dungeon master, say, hey, I have to bow out. But at least you tried. When you're determining if this is going to be a game for you, also realize that the combat in Dungeons & Dragons is going to be turn-based. So if turn-based combat or something that is a little bit slower paced isn't something that you're okay with, you might struggle with it, but I would still once again say, give it a try and see if it works for you. Additionally, Dungeons & Dragons has a lot of rules. They have literal textbooks for how to play games. Now here's the thing, you do not need to read the player's handbook cover to cover in order to play Dungeons & Dragons. As a player, you need to be familiar with the basic rules of combat, aka the action economy, movement, how you attack things, what your abilities are for your specific class, what your spells do, and how to do like ability rolls and saving throws. How do those work? Beyond that, the DM is going to help guide you through most of the other things. And let me tell you, as a new player, you are going to get so much grace from your group. And if you're playing with all new players and you're all trying to pick up the hobby, all of you are going to be a little bit more understanding of each other. So there are several rules, and seeing the size of the player's handbook can be very overwhelming, but you only need to read a fraction of it in order to have a successful campaign as a player. If you're wanting to try being the DM for the first time, there's a little bit more you need to know. You need to know the same things as a player and then also have a rough understanding of all of the classes, just a little bit, and several of the spells. You don't need to, you can look those up as you go, but to save time, it might help if you know some of the more common spells, what the classes are generally capable of or what their roles are in the party. And then as the DM, additionally, you also need to know, you know what, we'll put a pin in that. That can be a future video on how to be a DM or a beginner's guide to DM. However, there is a little bit more work involved, as you probably expect. I've said all of this to say, if you've ever played Baldur's Gate 3, and you enjoyed it, then there's a decent chance that Dungeons & Dragons may be a good fit for you. It is by no means an exact replica of D&D, and it is not the perfect introduction to the rules of D&D. There are some differences, but it's a good litmus test of, is it something I might enjoy? All right, so if you're still here and you're like, okay, maybe I might want to try this Dungeons & Dragons things. What do I need as a player if I'm going to go play D&D? I'm sure a big concern could be, especially since I've already shown there are textbooks involved. I told you need dice. And if you've watched an episode of Dimension 20 or Critical Role, you see all of the fancy things they have, like dice towers and wooden DM screens and all of their fancy dice. And you're like, I'm not willing to invest that much money into a hobby I may not like. The good news is, when you're starting in Dungeons & Dragons, you can do almost everything completely for free. So I'm going to tell you the things that you might want to have for a game of D&D. I'm going to tell you the completely free option you can use that probably won't require you to buy anything. You can make use out of everything that you have at home. I'm also going to put down in the description below Amazon links to some of the things that I use for D&D that are very cost effective. I have some expensive things over here because I've gotten really into the hobby, but you don't need them. You don't need a big giant thing of fancy dice. You don't need a fancy dice box. You don't need a fancy DM screen. You don't need 50,000 books to play Dungeons & Dragons. All of this stuff is completely optional. It makes it fun if you get really into it, but you by no means need any of this. So let's talk about what you do need. First, let's start off with the obvious. You're gonna need some dice. Now, here's the thing. You can buy dice on, now once again, you can buy a bunch of dice on Amazon, very cheap. Link down in the description below. But if you are getting a bunch of buddies together and you guys don't want to invest anything in a hobby that you may not even like, if you Google online dice roller for D&D, you can find dice rollers where you just click a button or you type in 4D20, where you just type in like 4D6 and it will roll a bunch of D6s for you. Now, if you are going to play in a campaign with other people that have played D&D before, you're probably going to want to have physical dice. I wouldn't love having someone doing digital rolling just because I don't know if the website they're using has any sort of weight to it, if it's actually fair. I enjoy people having physical dice, but then again, if you were joining my adventure and you had never played before, as you saw, I've got plenty of dice. I would honestly offer to just let you borrow some dice so that you didn't have to invest. So that might be an option for you as well. My first set of dice I got on Amazon for I think $4. So whether you use an online dice roller or you buy some dice, you can do it very cheaply. Except when you're doing combat, you're going to want some sort of pawns for whenever you're doing combat, something to identify your characters versus enemy characters. Now one second, I'll go grab them. Now, something that I did for my group whenever I went to start playing Dungeons & Dragons is I got on Amazon and I bought all of these cool little minis for everyone. I was like, oh, there's an orc guy and there's a person with a cat. And there were all these really cool things that you can get. And I was like, this is going to be great. Everyone's going to have their own little mini that they can choose. And I think it was like $20 for all these minis. Let me tell you something. Mistake was made. As a DM, all of them are gray and they all look alike from a distance. So maybe don't do that. But here's the thing. I bought all of these. That's just little like pawns that are all color. Different colors are huge. I think I bought those on Amazon for like $8. It's like a giant bag of all these different pawns, and they work great. It's a great way to color code your enemies so you can distinguish them as DMs and as players. Much better than doing grayscale. But now here's the thing. Once again, if you're like, I don't want to invest and start buying things for a hobby that I don't like, you can do this without ever using pawns or anything like that either. You can just find things around your apartment to use. I'm actually looking around. Let's see, what are things I could use? One, your D12. If you buy dice, if you decide you want to buy some dice, unless you're a barbarian, you're probably not going to use your D12 that often. You can use your D12 as your pawn. Let's see, what else can I do? I could also take on my Coke can, I could just take the top off and use that as a pawn. Like literally just find anything small, a nail, a screw, a paper clip around your apartment or your house, and you can use that. You do not need to use anything fancy. This can be the most redneck game of Dungeons and Dragons ever, and you can have a great time with it. I will once again put Amazon links to the pawns and stuff that I bought, but by no means do you need them. Next up for combat, you're going to need some way to have a battle map. Now you're gonna see online people having these massive battle maps. They're color coded. They have great backgrounds on them. They've got a nice grid and they look beautiful. And let me tell you something, you don't need that. I personally use a grid dry erase board that I got on Amazon and wet erase markers. I definitely recommend wet erase over dry erase just because with dry erase, you start to kind of get rid of some of the lines and stuff and it can be really annoying. In fact, do I have any of those? Let me go see if I have those too. Yeah, here we go. I mean, so I bought these. It's just got like, a road with some trees on it that I drew. I've got a house that's got, yeah, it looks crazy because there was some fog and there was some smoke coming in. You can use that. If you don't want to buy marker boards, you can just go get some printer paper and you can just draw a grid out on printer paper and use that. We literally did that this last Tuesday for our combat encounter because it was not a combat encounter that I think our DM was prepared for. And so he just grabbed a piece of paper, drew out a grid. They were not equal squares, and that's completely fine. You just need it to work. You don't need it to look beautiful. So you can get cool stuff like this. You can have your local FedEx or Kinko's print off stuff for you if you want to get really fancy, or you could just use scraps of paper. It all works really well. I will put an Amazon link for these. I really like these. They fit together really well if you do want to have something that's a little bit nicer, but you don't need it. Now, next one is going to be the biggest one and maybe the most intimidating, and that is going to be, you're going to need the books. If you are a player, you're going to need the player's handbook. If you're a dungeon master, you're going to need the player's handbook, potentially some portions of the Dungeon Master's Guide, the monster manual, and probably an adventure module for you to play with. Now, please don't click away because let me tell you something, you don't need to go and spend tons of dollars on all of these books. Mostly because one, someone might let you borrow them. I showed you that giant stack of books that I was holding. I think I own 2 of those books. The rest of them were lent to me by one of my friends that's a DM. But moreover than that, I'm going to give you access in the description below to a great tool for Dungeons and Dragons that has digital versions of I think every single D&D book there is. It is called 5e.tools, and it is a phenomenal resource for players and dungeon masters alike. It has virtual copies of the player's handbook, of the Dungeon Master's Guide, of every adventure module. It includes maps for the adventure modules. I use it religiously, and it is a fantastic resource and is completely free. And they're not a sponsor of this video. I just love the resource so much. So you don't need to go buy a copy of the 2024 Player's Handbook. It's already on 5e.tools. You can go read the portions on the website that you need. Call it a day there. You don't need to go buy the book. Additionally, it's not a scanned in version of the book. They're hyperlinked. So if you look up your class and you're like, oh, I get this spell, you can click on the spell and it tells you what the spell effects are. You don't have to flip through the book. It's very, very convenient. So don't be afraid and think you need to go spend tons of money on textbooks because guess what? You can gain access to them for free. As I mentioned, you will need an adventure. If you are just starting playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends, I definitely recommend a shorter adventure like The Lost Mines of Phandelver. That is, I think, the introductory adventure for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and it's great. I played it. It's fun. It's short. It's just a nice little campaign. It'll probably take you a month or 2 to finish if you're playing, 4-hour sessions weekly. But it's a good starter into the world of D&D. After that, you're going to need paper to take notes on. You can use your phone if you don't have paper around or don't want to go buy paper. You need some way to track initiative or the combat order or the order in which characters are going to take turns. For that, you can use paper. Your DM can use their phone and write things down. You could use a whiteboard. Any of those things work. You don't need to pay for anything. 5e.tools has a great initiative tracker that the DM can use to keep track of hit points, armor class, spell save DC. And there's a player view that he can link out to the players so they can see a limited version of that to see combat order and the status of different characters. And then additionally, you are going to need maybe the most important thing, the one thing that you will always need to have with you, and that is a character sheet. Your character sheet is going to tell you all of the things your characters can do, the spells they have, what they're good at, what they're bad at, how old they are, what their star alignment is. You don't need to pay for that either. You don't need to have D&D Beyond subscription. You don't need to have bought the player's handbook on D&D Beyond, because you can just get a free PDF of a character sheet and then use 5e.tools or some online source to fill in the character sheet manually in a PDF editor like your web browser or like Adobe Reader. Save it, and then you can update it as you go and play the game. That's what I do. I don't use D&D Beyond or any sort of virtual thing to create my character sheet. All of my character sheets are PDFs that I just use Microsoft Edge to update. I'm sure I'm probably missing something, but you can do D&D basically for free if you're wanting to start out with your friends. There is no need to buy any of these fancy things that I have, and I don't even have super fancy things. If you want to buy things, I'll put links down in the description, but by no means do you need any of them. All right, so I've sold you on playing D&D, and you're like, all right, I want to play. How do I get into playing D&D? Well, the first option is obviously start playing with your friends. That's what I did. I was at work one day and I was like, I had the fever. I really wanted to play D&D, so I just started messaging people I work with. I was like, hey, do you guys want to play D&D after work next week? You will be shocked at how many of your friends will be like, yeah, why not? Let's give that a try. I actually had potentially too many people say yes. We had like 7 to 8 people in a party, which don't do that for your first. I keep it like 4 to 5. Make sure they're willing to commit to the time and at least give D&D a try, but just ask your friends if they want to play. Now, suppose that you've just moved away from all of your friends. Maybe you don't have a ton of friends yet in your area, or you've asked your friends and they've said no. You can go to the Meetup website and see if there are any Dungeons & Dragons events going on. There are tons of beginner level D&D courses you can join. Events for beginning players for D&D. Wizards of the Coast Adventures League. There are tons of great meetup options that you might find for Dungeons & Dragons. Additionally, go look at a local Facebook group for Dungeons & Dragons. Where I live, there's a local Facebook group for Dungeons & Dragons where people put all the time that they're looking to start a new campaign, people looking to join a campaign, people looking to start a campaign and looking for players. And they specifically say, I want new players because I either want to teach new players or I'm a new DM and I want people to learn with me. There is no shortage of opportunities for new players in D&D. And if all of those fail, maybe you live out in the middle of nowhere in Idaho, guess what? You can use Roll20, assuming you have internet, and people have D&D games going there online. All of these options are available to you, and hopefully they mean that you can find some way to play D&D. All right, guys, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, comment down below about what you thought. What are some of the things that you use for D&D? Better yet, what are some of the jankiest stories of some of the silliest things you've used to play D&D? Have you ever used the top of a soda can to represent your character? Let me know down in the comments below, because those are some fun stories. Or best yet, what are some of the epic moments that you've had playing D&D? What are some really cool things that your characters have done if you've played D&D before? Share those as maybe some inspiration for other people to read and think, man, all right, Chad didn't sell me on this, but this commenter did. I want to go try it now. Let's get people hyped into trying this awesome hobby. And once again, if you don't have anything to say, just comment your favorite emoji, because that goes towards engagement, helps other people find this video. It is a massive help to the channel. Make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell so you get notifications for new videos like this. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys in a later video. Good luck with your first Dungeons & Dragons campaign.